In the previous video, we saw how to solve a complex mathematical problem using AutoGen. In this video, we will see the same problem being solved using Assistance API from OpenAI. Step 1, we need to upgrade the OpenAI. So let's give pip install --upgrade OpenAI. Check the OpenAI version. It has to be 1.3.0 to work with Assistance API. Let's look at the entire flow of the Assistance API. The first step, we create an OpenAI client, and then we create a component called the assistant. And this assistant is the bot that we are creating. It can be a maths bot, as in this case, or it can be a bot for writing Python code. So every single assistant is for a different bot. And in a assistant, you can have multiple threads. That is, multiple users denote multiple threads. And in each thread, there are multiple messages being created. In one way, Assistance API is an extension of the chat completion, which was originally there in OpenAI. But the issue in chat OpenAI was that there was no provision to store the messages, but rather you had to explicitly store it in the memory. Whereas here in Assistance API, when you create a message in a thread, automatically the entire set of messages in the thread are retained. So it's a stateful thread. After creating the messages, we run the assistant. When we run the assistant, it goes to the running state, in which it can be in either the queued state or in progress state, or it can be completed. After it is completed, we get the final response from the assistant, and this can be displayed to the user. So from OpenAI, we import OpenAI, and we will create an object for OpenAI called the client. I have written a function to display the JSON in a pretty manner. You can see this entire file in the description below. This is a beta version. So first, as mentioned earlier, we create the assistant. So client.beta.assistance.create. When we create an assistant, we need to give it a name. The instructions is the system level instructions we were giving so far. And then we can mention the tools that we want this assistant to use to get the answer. When we mention the tools, when an answer is required, it automatically decides which tool to use so that it gets the answer that is required. There are basically three types of tools. One is the code interpreter, which makes use of a Python code to get the final answer. And the RAG, or the retrieval augmented generation we've been using so far, can now be done with the tool called as retrieval. And you can also create custom function calls. If you're using a code interpreter or a custom function call, you can use GPT-4 and GPT 3.5. But if you're using a retrieval model, ensure that you use a GPT-4. In short, you can use a GPT-4 Turbo or a GPT 3.5 Turbo. And remember, these turbo models are also less expensive than the normal models. So when we display the assistant object, it is created with an ID, and then we have the instructions, the model, and so on. Now that we have created the assistant, we need to create threads for every user. So for that, we use client.beta.threads.create, and this is also given a separate ID. A thread has multiple messages. So in client.beta.threads.messages, we can create the first message. This takes on the role of a user. If you remember, this is the same problem that we tried to solve using AutoGen. So let's give the same problem in content. In the message, we have a message ID. This is the first message that we have created. We have not yet associated it with any assistant, but we have associated it with a thread. And in content, the value field has the prompt that we are giving. Now we run the thread, and in this case, we associate the thread and the assistant. So here, when we run, the run has an ID, and we have the assistant and the thread that is associated with this assistant. And the thread starts running. Initially, the thread is queued, and then when the thread starts executing, the thread is locked. When the thread is locked, we cannot perform any other actions on the thread till the thread is unlocked by either a completed, failed, cancelled, or expired status. Initially, by default, the thread goes into the queued state, but as it is progressing, it moves from one state to another, and to check the current state of the thread, we use the retrieve function. When I run it and I check retrieve, I find that the status is currently in progress, which means the entire thing has not yet been completed. There is a function called messages.list, which will help us to retrieve the messages that are there in the thread. The last message will be the first message in this message list. So let's have a look at this. We have already given the question, and here it is trying to find the answer, where it says to find the probability, we will use the frequency distribution provided and so on. But it has not yet come to a conclusion. The first message I gave was the original prompt and the question. Based on it, it has now communicated with the assistance API, and it has come to the first output. But still, this is not the final answer. The agents now need to still communicate with themselves to get the final answer. All this happens automatically. So I have two messages, the original and the first intermediate output of the agent. Let me try to retrieve it again. So now, when I try to retrieve it, I find that the status is completed, which means I have got the final answer. Now, when I list the messages, the last message gives me the final answer. That is, the probability that a tire has to be substituted before 4,000 kilometers is, this is the final answer here. And for the second question, it gives me the final answer here. And for the third question, it gives me the final answer here. But in between, there were some messages that were exchanged. So this is the last message. The message before that is this. And the message before that is in value here. And this is the original prompt or the original question that we submitted. For better understanding, I have just displayed all the contents. That is, in messages, in data 2, we have the initial prompt, and that's in the content of 0 in the text and in the value field. And in data of 1, we have an intermediate conversation. And in data of 0, we have the final answer. Thank you.